In California's Central Valley, massive concrete pillars rise out of the farmland, stretching for miles. They are the skeletal remains of a dream, America's first true high-speed rail line. The project, once promised to whisk passengers between Los Angeles and San Francisco in under 3 hours, is now decades behind schedule, tens of billions over budget, and has been mockingly nicknamed the train to nowhere. Meanwhile, the Acela, Amtrak's premier service on the East Coast, is often called high speed, but it averages just 68 miles per hour between New York and Washington, D.C. A journey the French TGV or Japanese Shinkansen could make in half the time. This is the frustrating reality of American transportation, a nation that built the Panama Canal, put a man on the moon, and connected the world with the internet, cannot build the kind of passenger trains that have been standard in Europe and Asia for generations. So why? Why can the wealthiest, most technologically advanced nation on Earth not solve this problem? It's not for a lack of engineering know-how, and it's not because America is too big. The answer is not in our geography or our technical skill. To understand why your train is late, or why it doesn't exist at all, you have to understand a single, pivotal decision made in 1956. This is the story of the Federal Aid Highway Act, a law that didn't just build roads, but created a perfect, self-perpetuating money machine for the automobile. This machine, the Highway Trust Fund, established a permanent financial and infrastructural bias for cars that systematically starved passenger rail into obsolescence. Because of this act, building high-speed rail today isn't just a construction project. It's a fight against a 70-year-old system designed to prevent it from ever competing. This is the story of that system. We will trace its origins not just to a president's vision, but to a calculated corporate strategy perfected decades earlier. We will see how a handful of powerful men, motivated by clear-eyed self-interest, designed a political machine so effective, so durable, that it continues to pave over our future, locking us into a world of 4-lane highways and leaving our passenger trains as ghosts on forgotten tracks. To understand the victory of the highway lobby in 1956, you first have to understand the dress rehearsal. This story begins decades earlier, with one man, Alfred P. Sloan Jr., the meticulously organized president of General Motors. Sloan saw the future, and it was filled with his cars. But he had a problem. In the 1930s, nearly every American city was crisscrossed by electric streetcar lines. They were cheap, efficient, and popular. And they were his direct competition. Because of this, Sloan devised a strategically effective plan. He couldn't just convince people to abandon streetcars, he had to eliminate them. So in 1936, GM, along with Firestone Tire and Standard Oil of California, created a front company called National City Lines. Think of it as a corporate raiding party. Their method was simple. National City Lines would buy up controlling interests in streetcar systems in cities across America, from Baltimore to Los Angeles. But here's the twist. They weren't buying these companies to run them better. The plan was to kill them. Once in control, National City Lines systematically dismantled the electric rail infrastructure. They tore up the tracks, pulled down the overhead wires, and replaced the efficient streetcars with diesel-powered buses. Buses conveniently manufactured by General Motors. This calculated destruction of local rail was the proof of concept. It demonstrated that a coordinated effort by the auto, oil, and tire industries could effectively erase a competing mode of transport from the American landscape. It was a strategy honed in the streets of dozens of cities, long before it was deployed on a national scale. This was the conspiracy before the crime, and it provided the perfect blueprint for the main event to come. That main event needed a champion, a figure so respected, so undeniably American, that his vision would become the nation's. The auto lobby found him in President Dwight D. Eisenhower. This is how a 5-star general's obsession with national security became the car's ultimate weapon against the train. Eisenhower's motivation wasn't profit. It was a deep-seated fear born from experience. In 1919, as a young Army officer, he joined a military convoy on a grueling 2-month journey across the United States. The trip was a disaster. Roads were a patchwork of mud and gravel, bridges collapsed, and vehicles sank into the dirt. It was a strategic nightmare. This experience planted a seed, but it was his time in Germany during World War II that showed him the solution. There, Eisenhower saw Hitler's Autobahn. He marveled at the wide, paved superhighways that allowed German troops and supplies to move with terrifying speed and efficiency. He didn't see them as a public convenience. He saw them as an instrument of national power. Upon becoming president, Eisenhower was determined to give America the same strategic advantage. He envisioned a system that could evacuate cities in case of a nuclear attack and deploy military forces coast to coast without delay. Because of this fixation on national defense, Eisenhower provided the perfect, unimpeachable justification for the largest public works project in American history. It was a rationale no politician could easily oppose. Who would vote against national security in the heart of the Cold War? His genuine conviction gave the highway lobby the political cover it desperately needed. Their private commercial goals could now be wrapped in the American flag. Eisenhower had the vision, but he needed a cabinet to execute it. And this is where the revolving door between corporate America and Washington, D.C. sealed the fate of American passenger rail. To run the Pentagon, Eisenhower nominated the president of General Motors, Charles Wilson. Known as Engine Charlie, Wilson was a man who saw the world through the lens of an automobile executive. During his confirmation hearing, when asked if he could make a decision that was bad for GM but good for the country, he gave a now infamous reply. "I cannot conceive of one because for years I thought what was good for our country was good for General Motors and vice versa." This wasn't just a stray comment, it was a governing philosophy. With Wilson as Secretary of Defense, the man in charge of the military, the very justification for the highways, was the former head of the world's largest car company. This alignment of interests proved strategically decisive. The result was the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956. This was the pivotal moment. The legislative killshot. It wasn't just a bill to build roads, it was a fundamental restructuring of America's priorities. The act authorized the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highways, a project of almost unimaginable scale. And here's the calculated move that made all the difference. The act didn't just fund the highways. It created a permanent, self-fueling financial engine to ensure they would be the only thing funded. This was the moment the blueprint from the 1930s went national. The conspiracy against the streetcar was about to become the law of the land. This is the mechanism that made the highway lobby's victory permanent. The 1956 Act didn't just authorize funding, it created a fortress for that funding called the Highway Trust Fund. The architect of this system was a man named Francis C. Turner, a career bureaucrat at the Bureau of Public Roads. Turner wasn't a flashy politician. He was a methodical engineer who understood that infrastructure isn't just built with concrete, but with cash flow. He designed a system that was strategically perfect in its simplicity. Here's how it worked. The federal government would levy a national tax on gasoline and tires. That money would go directly into the Highway Trust Fund. And here's the crucial part. By law, that money could only be spent on building and maintaining highways. It was a closed loop, a self-perpetuating financial machine. The more people drove, the more gas they bought. The more gas they bought, the more tax revenue flowed into the fund. And the more money in the fund, the more highways were built. This wasn't just a budget, it was a lockbox. Turner and the highway lobby had created a system that was firewalled from the political whims of Congress. The money was earmarked, protected, and legally untouchable for any other purpose. No one could divert it to schools, to defense, or, most importantly, to railroads. This is why America's car-centric future became a certainty. It wasn't just a preference, it was now a mathematical and legal inevitability, engineered to run on its own forever. The immediate consequence of this perfect machine was a slaughter. For America's private passenger railroads, the Highway Trust Fund created a competitor they could not possibly beat. The effect wasn't gradual, it was a cliff to might. Consider the impossible math forced upon the railroads. As private companies, they had to buy their own land, lay their own track, and maintain it all at their own expense. They even paid property taxes on the very tracks they owned. Now, suddenly, they had to compete with a brand new, nationwide network of pristine superhighways that, from the driver's perspective, was free. It was the business equivalent of being forced to fight with one arm tied behind your back against an opponent whose arms were being swung by the government. This created an immediate and irreversible death spiral. As drivers and freight haulers abandoned trains for the new, subsidized interstates, Railroad passenger revenues plummeted. With less money coming in, the railroads had to cut service. They eliminated routes, laid off workers, and let their passenger cars and stations fall into disrepair. This, of course, made train travel even less appealing, driving more people to their cars. It was a feedback loop of decay. Within a decade of the Highway Act's passage, the great passenger trains that had once defined American travel, the 20th Century Limited, the Super Chief, were becoming relics. This is how a nation built by the railroad began the process of systematically dismantling it. This systematic dismantling created a political problem. By the late 1960s, the near-total collapse of private passenger rail was no longer just a business story. It was a national embarrassment. The very trains that had symbolized American progress were rusting away. So, what did President Richard Nixon and Congress do? They didn't decide to save passenger rail. They decided to nationalize its losses. This is the origin story of Amtrak. The National Railroad Passenger Corporation, or Amtrak, created in 1971, was not a bold investment in a new future for transportation. It was a calculated act of political triage. It was designed to get the dying passenger rail business off the private railroads' books, freeing them to focus on their profitable freight operations, while also quieting the public outcry. From its very inception, Amtrak was engineered to be weak. It was a quasi-public corporation, a political orphan with no powerful constituency. Congress gave it just enough money to run, but never enough to truly rebuild, modernize, or expand. Here was the critical flaw. Amtrak didn't own the vast majority of the tracks it ran on. It was a tenant in a house owned by the freight companies. This is why Amtrak trains today are so often late. They are forced to pull over and wait for a passing freight train, because the freight company owns the rails and its cargo is the priority. Amtrak was created to be a ghost, a specter of passenger rail haunting a system now fully dedicated to freight and cars. It was a solution designed not to fix the problem, but to manage the public perception of it. This political sidelining of rail was happening at the exact same moment the Highway Trust Fund was physically reshaping the nation in a way that made future rail projects a nightmare. The interstate system didn't just connect existing cities. It created an entirely new way of life, suburban sprawl. This is how the Highway First policy created a permanent, physical barrier to high-speed rail. Fueled by cheap gas and federally guaranteed mortgages, developers followed the new interstate exits into the countryside, building seas of single-family homes. This wasn't an accident, it was the entire point. The result was a low-density landscape completely dependent on the automobile. The further communities spread out, the more useless public transit became, which in turn created more political pressure for more highways. It was the Highway Trust Fund's feedback loop in action, pouring concrete over any alternative. Because of this, when modern planners try to map a high-speed rail line, they run into a logistical and financial wall. High-speed rail needs what the interstates originally had: long, straight, uninterrupted corridors. But those corridors are now gone, occupied by decades of car-centric development. To build a line from Los Angeles to San Francisco, you don't just need to lay track. You have to navigate a legal minefield of thousands of private properties, strip malls, and subdivisions. This is why the cost of land acquisition for high-speed rail in America is astronomically high. The interstate highway system didn't just outcompete the railroads. It physically paved over the very land where its successor could have been born. The interstate highway system didn't just outcompete the railroads. It physically paved over the very land where its successor could have been born. This is why projects like California's high-speed rail become a torturous, decade-long battle over land rights, costing billions before a single mile of track is laid. But the physical barriers, as immense as they are, hide a deeper, more powerful obstacle. The real reason America is stuck is not just concrete. It's the financial architecture that concrete was built on, a system designed in 1956 to be permanent. This brings us to the perfect machine we met in Chapter 4, the Highway Trust Fund. This is the locked box at the center of the story. Think of it like a dedicated subscription service for roads. Every time you fill up your tank, a portion of the federal gas tax goes directly into this fund. And by law, that money can only be spent on one thing: highways and transit. It's automatic. It's self-perpetuating. It operates outside the yearly political food fight of the federal budget. Because of this structure, high-speed rail has to play a completely different game. It has no trust fund. It has no automatic, guaranteed stream of revenue. Proponents of rail must go to Congress every single year, hat in hand, and beg for money from the general fund. They have to compete with the military, with healthcare, with education, with every other national priority. This is why high-speed rail projects are constantly stalled, scaled back, or canceled when political winds change. Highways are on autopilot. Rail is on life support. This is the ultimate legacy of the 1956 Highway Act. It wasn't just a construction project. It was the creation of a permanent financial bias that continues to shape our world. The reason America doesn't have high-speed rail isn't a failure of engineering or a lack of imagination. It is the direct, calculated, and ongoing success of a system designed 70 years ago to ensure the future would always belong to the automobile. The game was rigged from the start. If you found this eye-opening, hit subscribe for more deep dives into history's hidden causes. Leave a comment. Was the Highway Trust Fund a brilliant piece of long-term policy or a historic mistake?